From my bed the blanket fled, and the sheet refused to stay, and the pillow as a billow gathered up and flew away. If you're wondering who wrote these verses, stay tuned and let's learn more about the poet and the poem together. Hello and welcome to our 5 Minutes with Ekaterina Russian Poetry. Our poet for today is Korney Ivanovich Chukovsky. He is the best known because of his poetry for children, but actually out of 14 volumes of his works, only one volume is dedicated to children's poetry, and all the rest are actually very serious scientific things, for which he honored the degree of the Doctor in Literature. And such a small heritage dedicated to the children, and such a great fame which came with it, and such a long years of struggle. And you cannot imagine that these poems for children for years and years they were forbidden, and different people in different times they were thinking that there would be some political underline under all these layers of the very funny and childish rhymes. Korney Chukovsky was born in St. Petersburg, but his mother was originated from Poltava, and she served at the kitchen in the big estate, and she fell in love with the son of the owner of this estate. It was quite a common story back then, and she had a baby from him, but the parents refused let them to marry, and she had to go with the child to Odessa. Odessa is the coastal city in present-day Ukraine, and their mother worked very hard trying to raise the young Korney Ivanovich future writer and his sibling. For a very short time the father supported the family, but then he just stopped because he found another wife, and he just was happy with his own marriage. And as for the young boy, the status of the person without a father back then in the beginning of the 20th century, it was a disaster. And exactly because he didn't have an official status, there was a special law. The son of a kitchen worker who didn't have a father, he was expelled from the gymnasium, and he had to finish it extramurally. This created for him such a big pressure that for a long time he had this complex of low esteem, and he didn't know if he values. He tried somehow to show that he is valuable and he is worthful, and he has his own destiny in life. Along with the outstanding marks in gymnasium, which again he couldn't attend, he studied extramurally. He also had the literature talent, but he decided to start his career as a reporter in one of the Odessa's magazines, and he taught himself English, but in the textbook, self-study textbook which he used to learn, there were missing several pages dedicated to pronunciation. So he knew perfect English, how to read and translate it, and he had no idea how to speak. But he said that I know English. That's why the magazine for which he was working on newspaper, they sent him to the Britain, and they wanted him to wrote some articles about the political situation. But as soon as he came to London, he realized that nobody can understand him, and he actually is not very good in understanding other people. So instead of going to the parliament, instead of writing these political articles about what's going on, he went to the library, and he actually taught himself English. And he would later become one of the translators who translated English literature into Russian. But back then, the head of the magazine or this newspaper, he was so angry at Korney Chukovsky that obviously he was fired. And exactly at this time, he decided, being in London actually, that his destiny is not publishing in newspaper articles, but his destiny is writing. And he started the new career as a critic of literature. And in this field, the most valuable for everything he was doing is actually studying the Russian poet Nekrasov. And exactly Korney Chukovsky at this time, he is collecting the poems which were never published before, and he publishes them, he studies them, he writes the critical articles about it, and he is the first person who discovering this new, never heard of before poems. And then he started to write some poetry himself, especially after he had his own family and he had the children. So the children literature was written by him when he was approximately around the age of 30 years old, and he will read these poems for a long years, and in our imagination it's like an old man writing for small children, which is not true. He was a young father writing to his sons and daughter. And let's read together one of his poems, which is very funny, and again, I remember it from my childhood, and for me it's precious. It's a childish memories, and it's a good memories when somebody is reading your poem and you're just looking at the pictures, you don't know what is there, what are the letters, but you're enjoying it so much.
Одеяло убежало, улетела простыня, и подушка, как лягушка, ускакала от меня. Я за свечку, свечка в печку, я за книжку, та бежать, и в припрыжку под кровать. Я хочу напиться чаю, к самовару подбегаю, но пузатый от меня убежал, как от огня. Что такое? Что случилось? Отчего же все кругом завертелось, закружилось и помчалось колесом? Утюги за сапогами, сапоги за пирогами, пироги за утюгами, кочерга за кушаком, все вертится и кружится и несется кувырком. Вдруг из маминой из спальни кривоногий и хромой выбегает умывальник и качает головой. Ах ты гадкий, ах ты грязный, неумытый поросенок, ты чернее трубочиста, полюбуйся на себя. У тебя на шее вакса, у тебя под носом клякса, у тебя такие руки, что сбежали даже брюки убежали от тебя. Рано утром на рассвете умываются мышата, и котята, и утята, и жучки, и паучки. Ты один не умывался, и грязнулею остался, и сбежали от грязнули и чулки, и башмаки. Я великий умывальник, знаменитый Мойдодыр, умывальников начальник и мочалок командир.
As you got probably, it is the poem about the washstand, which is talking to a child who doesn't want to wash himself. And you can hardly imagine that somebody will think that it's political, but that's actually what happened to the poetry of Korney Chukovsky, not once but many times. Starting from the early years, before the 30s, during the revolution in 1917, actually before even the revolution in 1917, Korney Chukovsky with his family going to Moscow, and he's settling in Moscow where he will live the whole his life, and he's starting to publish his children's poetry and his critical overviews dedicated to different poems, and he is obviously in the new created, the Union of Soviet Writers. It's the poetry for children with the thoughts about children created for his own children. And some people think, no, there's something political, even though we don't see it, and that's exactly what they were writing. Even though we cannot find the political context, we should forbid it. And that's the first person who started to do it. It was Nadezhda Krupskaya. So you remember, she was the wife of Lenin. And she said, no, the Soviet children, they shouldn't read this. And that was so ridiculous. Starting from the 20s and up to 30s, he was basically left without any means of existence. And in 1930, he's writing a letter that he was doing something wrong, and now he would write a new literature for children about the collectivization. The only activity which was allowed to perform, it was to go from the kindergarten to kindergarten, or from the school to school, reading his children's poetry. Approximately this time, his young daughter, who was only 11, she falls sick, and he knew that she would die, but trying to cheer her up, he promised her to publish the book dedicated specially for her, and he actually wrote this book, but again they forbid to publish it, and this made him so upset, and for a long time he just stopped his literature or children's literature, poetry. Then the war started, and the young son of Chukovsky was killed in the battle. This again adding to the sufferings and the repression, this silencing, and this distress, losing two of his 4 children for whom he was so wholeheartedly opened. It made him so depressed that the only thing that cheered him up was the communicating with young children, and he's trying to do it more, and he's going to the kindergartens again, to the schools again, and he's trying to save this childhoodness, and he said that children are special kind of human, and that they all are crazy, but we shouldn't cure their craziness, we should support it, because they will grow up and they will lose it. Let's read together another poem and see what happens there. They designed specially for children, and they're so positive, despite all this hardship.
Ехали медведи на велосипеде, а за ними кот, задом наперед, а за ним комарики на воздушном шарике, а за ними раки на хромой собаке, волки на кобыле, львы в автомобиле, зайчики в трамвайчике, жаба на метле. Едут и смеются, пряники жуют, вдруг из подворотни страшный великан, рыжий и усатый таракан. Таракан, таракан, тараканище. Он рычит и кричит, и усами шевелит. Погодите, не спешите, я вас мигом проглочу, 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 не помилую. Звери задрожали, в обморок упали. Волки от испуга скушали друг друга. Бедный крокодил жабу проглотил, а слониха вся дрожа так и села на ежа. Только раки-забияки не боятся бою драки, хоть и пятятся на сад, но ушами шевелят и кричат великану усатому. Не кричи и не рычи, мы и сами усачи, можем мы и сами шевелить усами. И назад еще дальше попятились, и сказал гиппопотам, крокодилам и китам, кто злодея не боится и с чудовищем сразится, я тому богатырю 2 лягушек подарю и еловую шишку пожалую.
All of the things that depicted in the poem, they are so realistic, and you can imagine all the things. They're simple and serious at the same time, and that's why children loved Korney Chukovsky, and it was actually him who introduced so-called campfires in the way I remember them as a child, and I never knew it. I actually figured it out today when I prepared this video. He was the first who established this fire tradition in near the Moscow, and twice a year in the beginning of summer and by the end of summer he made this fire, and in order to get there, instead of tickets, you would have to pick several pine cones and bring it with you. That would be your ticket. And to these meetings he invited many other writers, poets, and it was also a very funny thing when everybody was singing songs, playing around, going around the fire together, and it was nice, and I remember it from my childhood too, because that was such a nice tradition. So they said you need to pick pine cones in order to get there, and as a child it was so serious to go and to pick exact number of them and to bring it to the campfire, and I felt that actually I contributed a lot because my pine cones, they were there. He lived till the age of 87, and by the end of his life he was honored with the Lenin's Prize, which was the highest at the time, and he was very welcomed everywhere. This celebrating birthday ceremonies, this odes and saying that he's living classics, they actually he meant all of this because he lived such a long life. And he supported people whom you would never imagine that somebody would support. He was the only Soviet writer who came to greet Boris Pasternak when he got the Nobel Award. everybody else silenced it and were afraid of it. And he was the one who supported Anna Akhmatova, and his daughter was the secretary of Anna Akhmatova, and he was the one who hid Solzhenitsyn when he was announced the person non grata in the USSR. That's a great man, and that's a great story. Let's read another short part of the poem together.
У меня зазвонил телефон. Кто говорит? Слон. Откуда? От верблюда. Что вам надо? Шоколада. Для кого? Для сына моего. А много ли прислать? Да пудовы так 5 или 6. Больше ему не съесть. Он у меня еще маленький. А потом позвонил крокодил и со слезами просил: мой милый, хороший, пришли мне калоши, и мне, и жене, и Татоше. Постой, не тебе ли на прошлой неделе я выслал 2 пары отличных калош? Ах, те, что ты выслал на прошлой неделе, мы давно уже съели, и ждем не дождемся, когда же ты снова пришлешь к нашему ужину дюжину новых и сладких калош.
I remember as a child I didn't know a lot of these words, and we didn't have a phone in our apartment, so I've never heard that somebody can ring you. I never heard the phone, and also I didn't know what is pud, which here is translated as a ton, but it's an old measurement. We don't use it anymore, and there were so many mysterious words, but I was so impressed with these rhymes, and I wanted to hear more of it. And they're all great. I'll add the link to these poems. You can read them in Russian with a beautiful translation. It's a genius translation, and I hope you would love it. That's it. That's our poet and poems for today. I hope you picked a little bit of this feeling of childhood, and now you're smiling. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your support. The special thanks for my patrons on Patreon. If you're not there, please consider supporting me, because that's how I can improve the channel and create more of these videos. If not, just put your likes up, or subscribe if you're not here, and I hope to see you very soon in the next videos. Goodbye for now.